In studying this graph explaining what a cartel such as OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, does in order to increase the price of crude oil, you'll notice several things. First, note the triangle, in this case for a straight line demand curve, with its base at the perpendicular line from the price axis, segment AB. Next, the line segment of the demand curve where it meets the supply curve up to the price axis, BC. Lastly, we have the price axis down to the equilibrium point, segment CA. This is what is referred to as consumer surplus when the price is at $50 per barrel. The buyers or consumers in this case expend an equal amount to the price of $50 per barrel times the quantity demanded of 20 million barrels or $1 billion. This is the total revenue going to the firm. This revenue will then be used to pay all expenses, with the remaining revenue being called profit in an accounting sense. The triangle we have called the consumer surplus represents an estimate of additional expenditures the consumers would have paid if they had to in order to acquire the equilibrium quantity of 20 million barrels. In our example, the original consumer surplus is one half, $135 minus $50, or $85 times 20 million barrels, or $1.7 billion. Some of the potential revenue represented by the consumer surplus could be expropriated by the firm using a technique called price discrimination. A simpler tactic would be reducing the supply and driving up the price to everyone. If the firm is not able to do so, the consumer surplus stays with the consumers. Note, in this example, OPEC raised the price from $50 per barrel for crude oil to $70 per barrel for crude oil by reducing the supply from supply 1 to supply 2. The consumer surplus would shrink significantly. The consumer pay more, receive less. The loss of consumer surplus is equal to the increase in the producer surplus of $70 minus $50, or $20 times 15 million barrels, or $300 million, plus the deadweight loss of one half of the $50 million, the 20 million, 20 times the 5 million barrels again, or $50 million. The total loss of consumer surplus would equal the sum of two, or $350 million. There are further implications of deadweight loss. For deadweight loss, neither the consumer nor the producer receives this portion of the former consumer surplus. The result is the loss of surplus value. Again, should we desire to see the effect of increased competition, assume a major new oil field came into production, thus increasing the supply of oil from supply 2 to supply 1. Now reverse the direction of the changes. The producer surplus would decrease, and the deadweight loss in this case would go to zero. The consumer surplus would increase by the sum of the decrease in the producer surplus plus the decrease in the deadweight loss. This has income distribution implications. The income distribution relates to the rewards paid by the firm to the household for the use of its productive resources. Always keep in mind that everyone is a consumer. Not everyone is a productive resource, nor does each of the productive resources possess the same quality and quantity of resources. The extent that the economic rent or producer surplus rewards in excess of opportunity cost is shifted to the consumer surplus is dependent upon the degree of competitive pressures in the market.